Hey everybody, welcome back to Terminus. After further consideration, I continue to be the death metal guy.
And I endure as the black metal guy.
So over the past couple episodes, the black metal guy has sort of been taking the lead with classic Swedish melodic Black Death. But unlike him, this Europhile, I've decided to bring things back to the United States, God's country. So, and we're going to do that by talking about one of my favorite bands of all time, and what I believe is the band that produced the greatest melodic death metal band of all time. That is Arizona's own Benighted Sons, Vehemence. So Vehemence is kind of a fascinating band from a historical perspective. They are well known amongst cult death metal guys. For many, many years, they were considered one of the good ones in terms of bands operating in the Gothenburg melodeath style. But it was still highly appealing to fans of old school death metal or even brutal death in many cases. Today we're going to be covering their two middle records. That's 2002's God Was Created and 2004's Helping the World to See. Their first record, The Thoughts From Which I Hide, in 2000, is cool, but like clearly lesser compared to the rest of their discography. It's much more of a traditional death metal album, very much in the vein of Cannibal Corpse, actually, with only a little bit to do with their later work. It's not nearly as melodic, although as someone in the Discord server pointed out, the rhythmic strategies that the band would later employ to great effect are like very highly developed. The kind of particular drumming style and some of the unusual time signature choices are present on that record. After Helping the World to See in 2004, the band broke up, got together repeatedly, eventually resulting in the 2015 quote-unquote comeback record Forward Without Motion, which I was actually listening to today, and is an excellent record, but really kind of a victory lap for a band that at this point is really some good friends who all have families and long-term careers now, who are able to get together sometimes to play some shows or do some recording. So that was about 10 years ago. Hopefully we'll hear more from them, but either way, these guys have certainly made their mark on death metal permanently. I want to talk a little bit about some ideas I have regarding their style and Gothenburg in general. But first, black metal guy, I don't know. Have you ever heard Vehemence before? I'm sure that I talked about them with you back in the day, but have you ever actually heard any of it?
I don't think I had. Yeah.
So what are your impressions as a guy coming into this for the first time? I'm kind of curious because Vehemence at this point, it's like they're almost getting a second lease on life. Some of the, one of the younger guys in our server said that Zoomers are starting to pick up on Vehemence as kind of like a cornerstone melodeath record. God Was Created specifically as a cornerstone melodeath record. But I am kind of curious to hear from the perspective of a guy who was there during the big Gothenburg rush during the 2000s and is now revisiting this.
Yeah, I mean, God, if I had... I'm sure that I would have really enjoyed this if I had listened to it in the... I guess, God Was Created. Helping the World to See would have been '04 when I was in high school, so I was in no position to find my way there at that time. But like, if I had followed that direction when I was in college and getting into more, getting into extreme metal proper, I certainly would have enjoyed it a lot. It's hearing this connects a lot of dots because you can see the American metalcore bands had certain ideas of what what real death metal sounded like. And part of that is all the sort of highly songish and accessible Gothenburg stuff that we're familiar with as the influences on the American band. So, you know, your classic In Flames records, your Slaughter of the Soul, etc. But like looming in the background was this idea of like death metal. And I get the sense that to a lot of those bands, Vehemence would have been a cornerstone of that. And, you know, it's sort of like, you know, it's like, this is what Bleeding Through was listening to. Right?
I like that. Yeah. I could see that, actually. Yeah.
Or all those, or bands, you know, that we've talked about on this show that, you know, the unjustly forgotten Funeral Pyre. I've always seen them as America's Dawn. But they're also very clearly influenced by Vehemence, and it's possible they listened to Vehemence first, and then were like, what else were these guys listening to from Sweden? Right? It's, the Funeral Pyre, Skeleton Witch sounds a lot like Vehemence. When Skeleton Witch goes death metal, right? And we've talked about how Skeleton Witch is like, yeah, it's a metal band, but like secretly it's also a metalcore band.
I think that's very clear.
Yeah, it's the songs are organized like metalcore songs. So you start to see, I mean, God, even like, I mean, as a kid, I was really into like I really liked it, and you know what? I stand by it. I was into Atreyu, like the early stuff that was before it got like butt rocky. So you know, you have your kind of like your depressed, sensitive guy verse, and then you have like actual brutal death vocals, or like you have like they had low gutturals in the more aggressive parts. I feel like, you know, those guys probably listened to whatever they probably had a rotation of records that they thought was real death metal, and may not have included may not have included Altars of Madness, but it probably included Vehemence.
Yeah.
Right?
So
you know?
that brings us to sort of my position piece part of discussing Vehemence, in which I reveal that Gothenburg Melodeath is an American style of metal. So for those, you know, there's probably a lot of Zoomers out there that aren't even familiar with the term Gothenburg as like a term of art. So for those who aren't familiar, for the younger guys out there, we call it Gothenburg because a lot of the pivotal melodic death metal of the 90s into the 2000s all emerged from Gothenburg, Sweden. This includes At the Gates, Dark Tranquillity, In Flames, and many others. But what...
And that is the same city that includes, like, Sacramentum.
I forgot.
Sacramentum and Dissection, I believe, also. So there was a whole spectrum of, we spent a lot... Okay, Dissection was originally not in Gothenburg properly. They were in Götaland, and then they relocated to Stockholm. But they were connected to Sacramentum, who were a Gothenburg band.
Yeah, they're all related in that scene.
We've talked a lot in the latest... in our last episodes on Dawn and Sacramentum, how the Swedish sound is really this whole spectrum of things running from what we would call like the black death metal of like the later Dawn or Sorin or whatever, all the way over to stuff that we would call full-on Gothenburg melodeath. And it's really all it's really like, before this was neatly categorized, they were all just different spectrums of a certain kind of Swedish sound that doesn't really have a name. But the stuff that really broke big internationally, like far more than even Dissection or Sacramentum, was what we now call the Gothenburg bands, and that the Gothenburg melodeath sound. So basically, In Flames, Dark Tranquillity, and At the Gates.
Yeah. So, but this is the interesting thing about this style is, well, what is Gothenburg melodeath exactly? Well, we've got certain ideas. The diminished riff is a crucial aspect of it. maybe more Fry style vocals rather than death metal vocals proper. More kind of like accessible stuff, clear influence from Iron Maiden or even power metal in some cases. But I feel like if you examine it, like even examine the Gothenburg bands themselves, they're not that similar to one another. And really the constituent elements aren't really unique to Gothenburg. It's kind of a pastiche of other ideas that exist. So, for instance, a classic Gothenburg diminished melodeath riff. Sure, you've got the kind of sad but kind of energetic melodic style, but if you break it down structurally, a diminished melodeath riff is a pedal point thrash riff. You know, it's based off of bouncing off of a palm-muted open note and then playing a melody against that. But in the Gothenburg bands, we've decided to move that root note around a little more.
You've also referred to them as, I assume with diminished you're talking about a scale or something?
Yeah.
You've also described the general shape of that type of riffing as stepwise, where you're, so like a classic, like stereotypical shit Gothenburg riff would be like dum 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 dum. Yeah.
So there is some of that, but it's like, okay, so that's really a thrash technique. And actually, where does that get developed before any of the classic Gothenburg bands? It happens in Dismember. Dismember actually comes up with a ton of those ideas. Now, Dismember was always the most melodic of the Stockholm bands and the most sophisticated in terms of guitar playing. But again, that's not really unique to Gothenburg. Which of these bands actually sound like each other? Well, At the Gates was really kind of doing its own thing up until Slaughter of the Soul in 95, and Slaughter of the Soul is seen as, the record that really launches the style. But I just listened to Slaughter of the Soul the other day in the gym, and that impression is caused by selective memory. Does anyone remember how Slaughter of the Soul is like 1/3 Pantera riffs by volume? How much, weird pentatonic stuff is on that record? Dark Tranquility, kind of similar, but, far more technical in a lot of cases. And then by the 2000s, they start playing around with electronic elements and really kind of move into their own. In Flames is kind of similar, but way poppier right from the outset. The Jester race is in, 96, I believe, and doesn't... And it, barely sounds like death metal, even then. Slaughter of the Soul is still, appreciably kind of a death metal record. In Flames basically never was after Lunar Strain.
I think if you want, what the Gothenburg sound became for the Americans, it's a mix of In Flames. It's a mix of Jester Race and Slaughter of the Soul. And you can take your pick based on, the more kind of indulgent maiden-y stuff, and the more sort of, the more fanciful riffing and, lyrical stuff comes off of In Flames. And then if for the bands that are more hardcore aligned or also trying to position themselves as more death metal, they would talk more about Slaughter of the Soul. I think one reason we think of Slaughter of the Soul as the formative record for the style is simply that it became the socially acceptable one to cop to liking.
Yes.
Once that stuff became very unfashionable, if you were a cool guy, you could still say, well, of course I like Slaughter of the Soul because that's pretty aggressive and it's kind of like a hardcore record and whatever. But as we've been talking about for the last few episodes with all the Swedish stuff, a lot of the core riffing styles and melodic building blocks are as old as 93, right? I mean, Skydancer is more of a melodeath record than Slaughter of the Soul. It doesn't hew maybe to the Gothenburg formula. It's as we now know it, but it's definitely has a lot melodically in common with that. The first. Even the first in Flames, Lunar Strain, is... Skydancer and Lunar Strain are both a little more like black metal records. A lot of this stuff, I mean, even fucking... mid-era Dark Tranquillity. The Gallery is a lot like, if that came out today, people would say, oh, this is very polished, kind of commercial, melodic black metal.
Yeah. The Gallery would be very strange if it came out today. It would be it's like, it's kind of black metal. Why is it so technical? You know?
Right. It's so the it would do numbers on Bandcamp with people who were like, I mean, I like the Gallery. I'm just saying, like, people would think of it as a black metal record. So it's like a lot of. Basically, like, a lot of the melodic stuff was already in place well before the canonical Gothenburg records, which really are about kind of like packaging a thing that was happening in very concise and digestible song structures. I think that's the thing about Slaughter and Jester Race, is that they're like 3 to 5 minute songs.
Yeah. So we got to go back,
and neither of them is driven by blast beats.
Yes, that's true. So we got to go back in time a little bit for those who weren't around for the metal scene in like the mid 2000s. So in the mid 2000s, Gothenburg became like a slur. Because because it was massively overrepresented. Except what I suggest is that it wasn't Gothenburg that was overrepresented. It was American metalcore bands pulling Gothenburg riffs for their sound. And that is where you see the specific riffing techniques and song structures really get consolidated. None of the Gothenburg bands really sound like each other. All the American melodic metalcore bands sound like each other.
Right. They all pull a set of elements from disparate Gothenburg. I see where you're going with this. Yes, it's like the Gothenburg sound, maybe there's an affinity between these Swedish bands, but it suddenly becomes important to the Americans who notice these affinities and pull out certain aspects that they really like.
Yes, and as an aside, later on, you start to see the actual fucking Gothenburg bands pulling from American metalcore and taking the ideas back. You know, In Flames around Come Clarity, Dark Tranquillity around Character, they all start re-importing those ideas that were sort of like deformed by American metalcore bands. So this leads...
It's kind of the entire latter... They kind of got... Like, they ended up chasing the bands that were influenced. It kind of like wrecked their careers in a way.
Yeah.
Even if their early chorus records are pretty good for what they are, it kind of wrecked the rest of the Swedish band's careers.
Yes, basically. I like some of those records, but they were roundly hated by the metal scene for the most part. So that leaves you in kind of a weird spot in the 2000s where it's like, Melodeath has been entirely consumed by metalcore. So if you're a guy who's into death metal, but is also into Iron Maiden, where do you go? Well, there's a handful of cult things that we talk about in the death metal scene as, like, options. So first off, big again now, Argoslent. Okay, cool, doesn't sound like Gothenburg. They're more interested in speed metal, and they've got all this weird pentatonic stuff, and they're also really, really, really racist, so maybe you're not into that part. So where do we go from Argoslent? Well, you go to Migaus. But Migaus is kind of like Argoslent, but it doesn't have any of the speed metal, and it's sort of like deliberately boring and flat in the old school death metal way. It doesn't, like, pop out and excite you nearly as much as these other bands, and nobody actually listens to Migaus except for me and, like, 5 other people with autism, so that's not really an option. Intestinalism, a classic of, like, oh, this is what serious Melodeath should sound like. It doesn't sound like Gothenburg fucking at all. Intestinalism is really more like death metal plus X-Japan. It's cool, but it's, like, really esoteric, and again, nobody actually listens to them.
Migaus and Intestine are both good, very good bands in their own right, but
yes.
they've been overpuffed by the same people who are like, I can't listen to Argoslent because it's really, 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 really racist.
Yeah, well, It's funny because somebody actually in one of the Vehemence records on YouTube is like, oh man, this is really good. Like, intestine ballism is similar. Fuck no, they're not. What are you listening to?
Right. Yeah. So these are kind of widely disparate examples of non-Gothenburg melodeath.
Yes. And then rounding it out for the American side would be the Black Dahlia murder, which is basically what happens if In Flames was more like a real death metal band. But, like, you either get into Black Dahlia in high school and you listen to them for the rest of your life, or you're never gonna fucking get into it, dude. Like Black Dahlia is neat, I can appreciate it, but I'm a 35-year-old man. Like, unless you were listening to them when you were 16, you basically can't listen to Black Dahlia. So you're kind of shot. What is left that sounds kind of like Gothenburg, but is, like, doesn't have pussy metalcore stuff in it? You have one option, and that's Vehemence, who were left in a situation of kind of always a bridesmaid, never a bride. They could have been the biggest band in the world, but they had to have real jobs because they lived in fucking Arizona. You know, and they would have to basically travel 500 miles to get to a show of meaningful size outside of their local scene. But what they have left us with is some of the best melodeath ever recorded, in my view, and that all begins in 2002 with God Was Created.
This is Josh from Defeated Sanity, and you're listening to Terminus Extreme Metal Podcast. Yeah!
2002 is quite a year. It's difficult to remember that God Was Created is released in 2002. It sounds so ahead of its time, it's almost unbelievable. Some records that God Was Created came out before. Argus Lent's Incorrigible Bigotry. Killswitch Engage's The End of Heartache. It was before the it's before the first Black Dahlia record. It's before the Megaus record. God Was Created is actually before almost everything you would imagine to cite as an influence. And it's actually before nearly all of the major melodeath metalcore records. This puts it in a very strange spot historically. Much in the same way that it's hard to remember that Slaughter of the Soul is 95, it's extremely difficult to imagine God Was Created coming out so early. Also because I don't think I've ever seen it cited as an influence on anything. Black Metal Guy, while I think that you've got a really fair idea that perhaps this was a direct influence on a lot of the metalcore bands, I'm not so sure. Just because in 2002, widespread internet adoption was not nearly what it would be even a couple years later. It would just be difficult for a lot of people to get in contact with this record. And listening to Vehemence, there's a lot of stuff that you would like to compare it to, but similarly, it would be incredibly difficult for the band to come in contact with some of those ideas. There's a lot of riffing on here that sounds a lot like metalcore. It also sounds kind of like DSBM sometimes. There's even some parts that are kind of like emo chord structures, but again, for the Zoomers in the audience, I want to tell you, in 2002, if you were in a death metal band, you didn't listen to emo.
That's certainly true.
That would totally be a thing nowadays. Now you wouldn't even think anything of it. There's zero chance anyone in Vehemence had even heard of Indian Summer. All right, it's not like it is these days. God Was Created is a very unique record. It seems to have kind of come from nowhere and become an underground gem, but then sort of slid out without apparent influence. I don't think that's possible. This record is simply too good for it not to have influenced other people, but it's certainly not obvious. Now, why would that be? Well, I would say it's because it's just in such a weird cross-section. It's got a lot of Gothenburg riffing, but it's also like very clearly influenced by serious brutal death and death grind. There's a lot of blast beats. There's a lot of kind of chromatic OSDM riffs next to like the sugary kind of Iron Maiden influence stuff. And structurally, these songs all work as singles with big moments, but it's clearly designed to be listened to tip to tail as an album. So we'll get into it, but Black Metal Guy, what are your impressions of God Was Created? Which, by the way, I'll just say to everyone, this is my favorite Melodeath record of all time. Like, nothing touches it. This is just it, and I wish more of that style sounded like this. But what do you think?
Very respectable choice, dude. I like this album a lot. I can see why you love it. It's let's see. So yeah, I mean, what you said about the real death metal here is important. I mean, in a lot of ways, I guess brutal death metal had only just consolidated as an idea by this point. But in a lot of ways, this is structured like brutal death, as it was at that time. There's a lot of you'll hear phrases, you'll hear melodies that wouldn't be out of place in Gothenburg or other Swedish melodic death metal. You'll hear those melodies being played in structure in American brutal death structures, like 16th tuplet runs at 180 BPM or whatever, right? You'll hear there's a lot of they will often do an entire phrase that's palm muted rather than doing the sort of Gothenburg pedal point stuff. They'll do an entire riff that's where every note is palm muted, that's kind of like Rotting Christ, but it never sounds like Rotting Christ. It sounds like a brutal death band that is playing more, that is including more consonant stuff in there.
There's a lot of stuff on this that kind of sounds like black metal, but again, in '02, it was very rare to be a death metal guy in America who was also into black metal.
Yeah, I think it's possible. So I'll get into that a little bit, but yeah, it doesn't. Basically, I just want to stress that like some of the technique of like melodic palm muted, you could think, oh, that's Rotting Christ. Well, no, it's not. It's a lot of what gives this its originalities, you can hear them. This seems to me like a grand synthesis of ideas from Gothenburg and beyond in like the melodic side of Swedish metal, and then it's being injected into these American structures that give the melodies a really different shape and make them very distinctively sort of Vehemence style riffing.
It injects a lot of immediacy that wasn't necessarily present in the European styles.
Well, brutality, I think. I mean, the European stuff is immediate in the sense of like it has a big emotional impact. It's catchy. This is like very. It has like death metal aggression in a way that
I guess I mean in the sense that there is a blunt primary color quality to this album that sounds like an insult, but it's like it's blunt and primary color, but it's not shallow. It's very invested in melodic ideas that are almost ridiculous. Like there's a lot of just like alt and hard rock on this record working underneath the surface. This is clearly like a guitar guy band. Like these guys listen to Van Halen and take it seriously and shit, which is so esoteric for death metal in this period.
So what I want to suggest also is a lot of the songs work to kind of launch those more indulgent hard rock sections. But the other thing that is I do think there's an idea of one reason this doesn't sound like the American metalcore Gothenburg clones that came after, despite the obvious similarities, is I think these guys have a much broader sense of what that whole Swedish scene was, including possibly some of the bands we've covered recently. They may actually have been aware of Dawn or other deep cuts. And I would say one indication of that is the album cover. The album cover is a dead ringer for a record by Hypocrisy, which is Hypocrisy's first one, or second one, Osculum Obscenum, right?
I'd never considered that, but that's totally true.
Yeah, Osculum Obscenum also has like a guy a yelling guy getting great head on the cross. It's been a long time since I've listened to Hypocrisy, and I meant to go back and do that for the show, and I forgot. So I might do that. We're going to record the second review in a separate session. I may check that Hypocrisy record out in between and report back.
I will too, because early 2000s would be the heyday of Hypocrisy.
And there's tell me about it, George W. Bush, am I right?
We end the episode there. We're fully back in 02 with that.
Basically, there's actually something about Hypocrisy that's very salient, which is this. I'm just reading off the Metal Archives page, but during the late 80s, early 90s, Peter Tugtran. During the late 80s, early 90s, Peter lived in the U.S. and became heavily influenced by the American death metal scene. He moved back to Sweden with a new perspective on death metal. It's been a long time since I listened to Hypocrisy, but I remember it being more blast-oriented than some of, the Swedish, certainly the Melodeath stuff, the Gothenburg stuff.
There's a lot more Tampa in Hypocrisy than a lot of similar bands.
And also a lot more black metal, in ways that may... and also a lot more melody. So I can see, I'm going to have to go back and check it out. But basically, it wouldn't surprise me if Vehemence were an American death metal band who were into a Swedish death metal band that sounded American.
Yeah. Another point of comparison, actually, from kind of a similar scene, is a band that's very forgotten now, but their old material, I think, is just outstanding, which is Centinex.
Yeah. Ooh,
like
Centinex, that's
yeah, like Malleus Maleficarum era Centinex.
Because the early Centinex is kind of, it has like the ugliness of the Stockholm stuff, but also a lot of stuff that we would say is Gothenburg riffing now.
Yes, there's a lot of highly melodic, sort of diminished style riffing, but also a really intense kind of brutal aggression that sounds more American in a lot of ways.
Okay, that's a really good name check. And I would also say that they just, like, Vehemence seems to listen to, like, a lot of the deep-cut Swedish stuff. So, I was thinking about, Eucharist, who we've mentioned before at our discussions of Dawn and Sacramentum as really one of the first doing that style. If you want, we could throw in a Eucharist sample right now. But I would also just mention, like, Eucharist, Algeon, even. And Amon Amarth, who in 2002 were big in the European metal scene, but were probably just starting. One Cent from the Golden Hall is 98. In some sense, I think a lot of the most colorful, a lot of the things that sound the most like what became metalcore riffs on the Vehemence record remind me of the early Amon Amarth and Algeon, Eucharist, all that sort of particular mode of Swedish stuff.
Yeah. So, speaking of that, just to, we can definitely come back to Eucharist, but I want to just show something real quick before we get super into the weeds. I want to play a sample to give people an idea of how ahead of its time this record is and how much variation there is. So let's go to, I think it is I Didn't Kill Her. This is the 6th track on the album. This is it the 6th? Let me make sure. No, 7th, excuse me. So this is deep in the back half, which is a pretty unexplored part of this album for obvious reasons, just because there's so much happening up front here. It gets... it's very easy to get fatigued by this record. You mentioned that, talking about in your listening. It's a fucking exhausting record. It's too long. It is, like, bloated and excessive, and I love it for that. But let's go to I Didn't Kill Her, where we're just going to hear, like, 3 riffs back to back, all of which are fucking wild for 2002.
Calls from whispering dead.
Okay, so all three of those riffs sound like they're from half a decade later, at least, to my ear. The opening one, that slow arpeggiated figure, maybe has something to do with, like, later Peaceville stuff that might be happening around this time, but it's still pretty unique. The diminished riff is a straight-up melodeath metalcore riff that I am going to claim did not fucking exist in 2002. I think we imagined that it existed, but it never existed to this degree in '02.
It's like a Slaughter of the Soul riff, but it's a lot more complicated, and it's a little more like... It's a little more epic. So it has that Slaughter of the Soul plus In Flames feel that, like, probably nobody else had at that point.
It does, but, like, the speed and density and technicality really takes it to a new level.
Right. No, it seems like it seems like people who are... It seems like a band that is, like... I know what you mean. It seems like there's an established style, and a band is, like, throwing every trick at the wall to try to bring out something new.
Yeah.
But instead, that style is, like, being created, and they're just doing it in this incredibly sophisticated way.
Yeah.
That's got to be, like, one of the coolest, just, like, thrashing Gothenburg stepwise riffs.
Mm-hmm. And
cool.
What it really sounds like more immediately is stuff that would be done years later by, like, Parkway Drive.
Oh, really?
Yes, yeah. I actually insist that, like, the diminished riff gets, like, permanently established and rigorously defined by Parkway Drive. Who, like, the first few albums by that band are actually, like, remarkably fucking good.
When did that come out? Because
first Parkway is, like, 04,
like
05.
Falling in Reverse band or something.
Nah, they're a lot earlier than that.
Okay, well, they're not on Metal Archives. But what about, I mean, it's, the American band that did that a lot was, I think, somewhat more reputable band would be Darkest Hour.
Yes, Darkest Hour could definitely be a thing.
And Darkest Hour was earlier. But, like, again, that would be, like, one of the best Darkest Hour riffs. Darkest Hour is a very, they have not the world's deepest discography, let's say. Like, they're a band that really is a couple excellent songs that sound a lot like Slaughter of the Soul.
Yeah, no, Darkest Hour is, like, legitimately very good, and they got caught up in the metalcore thing, but it seems like critically they've been rehabilitated by, like, extreme metal people, which is good. And then the third riff in that sequence is a very strangely chorded, almost like shoegazy thing, and the only thing kind of similar in the water would be, like, Deftones from around this era.
That's totally possible. However, I have a guess.
What do you think?
Catatonia, buddy.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Brave Murder Day.
That's true.
And the Catatonia October Tide thing is, I think, very relevant here. October Tide, of course, is just slow versions of complex and very elegant, quote-unquote, Gothenburg riffing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or maybe it's got something to do with, like, melodeath bands that we've never listened to, like Insomnium or something, but we'd have to check.
I don't. Did Insomnium exist then?
Fuck if I know, man.
I think they're later. Yeah. But, like, basically, it does sound like the kind of shoegazy chording that was in Catatonia. That's just another like example of how I think these guys, like, whereas later Americans were, like, referencing, like, a handful of records from Sweden, it seems to me like these guys actually understood that, like, a big musical context coming out of that, you know.
But what I find so interesting is that despite all that, this is such an intensely, like, American coded record. You know, the American death metal is so important to this whole thing. And that comes out in a very distinct way throughout the whole record, and we'll get into that more. But should we? Obviously, we have to do it at one point. Should we just go to your sample to be?
We can do that. Yeah.
So
I also think smashing those two riffs together was a very American thing to do, right? You do that crazy, involved, stepwise thrash riff, and then you have the shoegaze thing, and it just works like a hardcore breakdown or something. Yeah, that's very American.
Well, one thing that I want to emphasize about Vehemence is a wonderful, distinctly American tastelessness, which I think is very defining on this record. I'm saying a lot of things that sound derisive, but no, it fucking rules. I love how forward and direct this album is. There's a ton of complexity and subtlety, and I've got ideas where some of that might come from, but this is like a big, dumb death metal record at its core, which is one of the things that makes it so special.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so on that note, let's go to a track that is maybe a little more elegant, but also I think has a lot of brutal death in it.
Yes.
This is the second track on the album, which I think for a lot of listeners would be the place where they would really pick up their ears and be like, "There's something weird." Like, this is great and it's really interesting. This is it. It's an ode to the what? God, no, I'm losing. I can't do the meme, but
it's an ode to high school love.
I was it's an incel song.
Yes, it is. It is extremely. This is an incel album, and we love it for that. So let's listen to the immortal "She Never Noticed Me."
Straight from the notebooks of the Supreme Gentleman himself.
Yeah, well, should we talk about lyrics now?
Yeah, so they have a common theme in early 2000s American metalcore was sort of like psychotically violent simping.
Yes.
And so a lot of the lyrics here are about feeling entitled to a woman that you don't know and killing her.
Oh, well, this is a concept album. It's all one narrative.
Is it all about that?
Yes. So God Was Created is...
Well, no wonder I thought it was all about that.
Yeah, God Was Created is a concept album about the protagonist, I guess, being a high school guy, I guess, who develops a sexual fixation on a prim and proper Christian girl in his class, who it turns out is being molested by her father and has also developed a sexual obsession with Jesus Christ and his crucifixion.
Well, that sounds like typo negative.
Yeah, it is kind of typo negative. So one of the things that makes this record is the utterly insane lyrics, the sheer brazen conceit of the concept, and just how death metal it is. It really is as though these guys were like, what if we did, like, an album that's all a love song, but it's like death metal, so it's all fucked up. And they lean into that idea so hard and so earnestly that it actually becomes, like, really fucking weird and creepy as a result. It's, like, clumsy and awkward, and it sort of works through that clumsiness. There's a lot of kind of aesthetic similarity, I would say, to Cryptopsy. You know, this collision of sort of like...
Yeah, although the Cryptopsy lyrics are poetic.
Yes, the Cryptopsy lyric. I mean, Lord Worm is just a better lyricist than Gearhart. Yeah. But I do like the kind of, like, clumsy delivery of this. I dream of her playing out scenes in my mind. I dream of her kissing me gently, caressing. I must kill her. She doesn't want me. She'll die. I must kill her. She can have no one but me. Here I come.
At the end of the song, the big payoff is, I'm in love with her.
Yes.
I'm in love with her. It's basically, yes, the lyrics themselves, there's no way around it, are just, like, real clunkers, I think. But, like, they acquire a certain plausibility from the fact that they're the rantings of a deranged teenager, right? And that they're, like, they're not for anyone to hear. They're diary entries or they're obsessively looping thoughts, right? Stylistically, I think there is, like, stylistically, if they seem like anything else in lyrics, they seem like butt rock, right? It's a little like, it's the 90s radio rock version of it is, I guy a mad at girl.
Yeah.
But they're sort of very, first person and confessional and sort of like one thing. I mean, I think one marker of the distinction we're trying to draw here is that, like, true extreme metal bands almost never swear in their songs. These guys swear
a lot.
And so there is an elegance to the way that these, like, blunt kind of these blunt lyrics are grafted on to this incredibly sophisticated music in a way that is very compelling, and there's things happening artistically that work out the tension between those two levels of the record, right? Yeah.
And I think that it's like, what's interesting is the perspective. There's a way to read this which is, like, very straightforwardly sort of, like, misogynistic and juvenile, but I think that they're kind of deliberately playing off that. You know, one couplet that I always remember from this song, and I always sing along with it, is, sometimes I notice the bruise on her face or her swollen lip, but most oft I gaze at the cross which hangs between her breasts, which is, like, remarkably clever framing of the whole thing, and, like, really making it clear, it's like, oh, this is an insane bad person. This isn't like, oh, the bad guy's actually the good guy shit. It's like, no, this is, like, terrible.
That's true. That's kind of what I was getting at with the, like, journal thing. It's like, this is, we aren't necessarily identifying this guy, we're watching him. Like, the lyrics are like a found object.
Yes.
That's fair and important to remember, and that sort of like framing of it, the fact that it's kind of like, yeah, there's instead of being immediate first person, it's kind of a dramatic persona, and that's part of what makes the lyrics work with the music.
Yeah. So musically also, this is nowadays known as like the big single track. It's funny, back in the day in the 2000s, it was all about Christ I Fucking Hate You, probably because it's got like an insane solo sequence in it. But now She Never Noticed Me is like the pivotal track on this record. And one thing I want to draw attention to are the little extras that Vehemence uses that are actually very integral to the music. The piano line, the spoken word stuff, the clean guitar. These aren't like mere adjuncts to show off technique. They're really important to the songs, and I think they really elevate the record.
I really noticed, so the last riff in that sample, the that one with that sort of ascending, palm muted run is, the keyboard there really makes that.
Yes.
Just smoothly layered over kind of Scandinavian extreme metal keyboards or whatever, right? Like almost like emperor keys. You know, when I try to think of like where that melody might come from, well, it does sound like one set from the Golden Hall type stuff. But there is the tempo they're playing it at really doesn't. Even though they're you know, like 16 notes or something, it's being played at a very stately pace, and it's got those keyboards over it, and it feels like doom metal.
Yeah,
like it almost feels like skepticism or something.
Yeah, Vehemence operates in very unusual tempos. It's a lot of like mid-slow and mid-fast.
So that's something I wanted to talk about in general, is like one obstacle for me to listening to this record first is that it has an odd sense of tempo relative to the kinds of melodies it's most engaged with. I was trying to tell the death metal guy what I meant. It's like you took enough melodic information for 2 In Flames records, and you took the sound wave or something, you took the shape of the melody if you drew it out and like squished it.
Yeah.
And so everything is happening like maybe like faster. A lot of it is faster than you would expect to really give the melodies time to breathe. The melodies feel more vertical rather than having like a horizontal flow to them. And the production, because it has this kind of percussive brutal death production, the percussion kind of hollows out the melodies. That's okay. That all makes this record what it is, which is brutal and dense and not as accessible as it might be. But it you know, it's it gives it it gives it that thorny specificity that makes it really great, and is why the death metal guy prefers it to the album after this. Whereas,
that's one of the reasons.
And I hope people could hear in that sample the similarities to Brutal Death, even in that slow, stately riff. Just the fact that it's like a continuously palm-muted tuplet run.
It's probably one of the reasons that I also just think this is better than almost all Melodeath, is that proximity to Brutal Death.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely, yeah.
So let's go to another one. Let's go to Fantasy from Pain, which is one of my favorite songs on the album. It's the third track, right after She Never Noticed Me, continuing the story. This is where he's going to break into his would-be lover's house, and he's sort of observing her from the street. So another thing ahead of its time, this starts with the old-timey radio effect, which would become a metalcore standard, but certainly was not in 2002. They're ahead of the pack on that. But we're going to start basically right after that, going into the main riff of this song, which is a shockingly weird riff, and is basically DSBM. So let's give this one a try. So many things to talk about. So, first off, as you pointed out, that opening riff is basically like a slowed down Funeral Pyre riff, like you were comparing them to. Funeral Pyre, great band. We're going to do an episode on them at one point, don't worry, guys.
Yeah, band that comes along later, just very similar to them. Yeah,
yes. But, it also sounds like a DSBM riff, and like DSBM is not a thing in 2002. It's not a concept, but that's like a perfectly formed DSBM riff. Then there's the strange kind of arpeggiated figures that dot this song, which have, as the black metal guy pointed out while it was playing, fascinating and much busier drum presence than you would expect. It's hard to find the time to touch on it, but real quick, the drumming across this record is great and busy but not overbearing. There's a lot of moments of like clean guitar or deliberately softer parts where there's still a shockingly aggressive and busy drum presence, which really adds a lot to the rhythmic dimension of this music. Also worth noting, something I forgot to mention prior, Vehemence loves 3/4 time, not 6/8. It's really a specific like waltz time 3/4. 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3, usually emphasizing the third beat. This is...
Oh, you're right.
That's the entirety of the first song, and most of the second song is oriented around 3/4, and it comes up continuously throughout the rest of the record. It's very pivotal to this band. One of the reasons they sound so different. And, of course, I gotta bring up, the solo is fucking immense. This is one of the few extreme metal records where the solos are absolutely crucial to the album and extremely memorable on their own. One of the only other ones being None So Vile by Cryptopsy. But I really just love the mood of this song. This sort of like sorrowful yet kind of predatory, this constant push and pull between these sort of like misogynistic brutality and kind of like simpering, pathetic emotional quality. I don't think there's any other record out there that plays off those ideas in interaction with each other.
Death metal guy, you got to tell him your favorite lyric from that. I might have missed it.
Oh, dude, I cry in the club every time when he says, "My hand moves to my scrotum, not wanting to enjoy."
It's these beautiful chords, the sighing chord, yearning chords.
Yes.
My hand goes to my scrotum.
It's
So
again, and it's like, you know what it is? It's the high-low art collision that we always talk about. It's the willingness to pull back from sophistication that makes this record so special.
also gotta point out that beautiful sequence of riffs does sound a lot like Amon Amarth, but like Amon Amarth records that haven't come out when this came out. So one of the most beautiful Amon Amarth songs is Runes to My Memory. This sounds like Runes to My Memory from 6 years before.
Yeah, dude, it's unbelievable how ahead of the curve these guys are, and yet how underappreciated they are.
It's pretty crazy when you're like predicting things in. You're so tuned into someone that you're doing the next move for the bands that influence you before they do it.
If God Was Created came out in 2008, would they have become the biggest metal band in the world? You know? Or would it still be too challenging?
It would be too. It's too much like Brutal Death. It's too much. You know, it doesn't sound like. Despite the very, very good thrashing pedal point, like thrashing stepwise riffs here, this does not sound in any way like thrash metal, and it's not like song-wise. It's not organized like heavy metal either. You know, even though it builds to these big kind of progressive or alt passages, they're not really delivered in a consistent, predictable way you would want for like a
it's not it's not verse chorus. Yeah.
No.
Yeah, these are oddly linear songs in a lot of ways. So really, I think the material kind of speaks for itself, but there is obviously one last thing that I have to touch on this record. So as we say, this is kind of a hard record to get all the way through, and part of it's because of what I'm going to play you.
Yeah.
So The Last Fantasy of Christ is the best song on the album. It's, I think I've decided it's probably one of my like top 10 songs of all time. Individually, maybe even top 5. I don't think there's ever been a more perfect Melodeath song than The Last Fantasy of Christ. It does so much. It's clearly the climax of the album, but the problem is it's track number 6, and there's 4 more after it, which have a lot of good stuff on them, but like you're so drained by the end of this song, it's kind of hard to like pay attention to the rest. But that's really just a testament to how
I would agree about that. This song is insanely good, and every time, at first when I wanted to do was thinking of what to do, I like every riff I wanted to use was on this song.
Yeah, it's the perfect microcosm of the band, really. Mm-hmm. So The Last Fantasy of Christ is the musical and really emotional climax of the record, where it's right in the middle, and you pull away from the story to go to an actual interesting take on an indictment of Christianity and Jesus in particular, which has kind of made me, it's kind of suggested to me, it's like, maybe this is an immolation situation where these guys aren't quite as anti-Christian as you think. Like, the contempt seems located in a different place from where you typically. It definitely
reminded me of immolation. Yes, angry at Jesus for not existing.
Yes. I mean, the spoken word passage, well, you'll hear it in just a moment. This is a long sample because we need to prep the whole run-up to and the explosion of the solos in this, but something makes me think no one's going to complain about the time spent here. So, Vehemence, The Last Fantasy of Christ, my favorite Melodeath song of all time. Let's do it.
would even begin. You and I.
I mean, fuck, man. What do you even say to that? It's a. I would argue that this is one of those instances. This section here is a completely perfect piece of music.
Oh yeah.
There's just like nothing that you could change to improve it. The density is completely unbelievable, but there's such a clear relationship between all the riffs, the progression into the clean passage before the eruption of that solo is like pop songwriting at its peak. And even through its sort of like maximalist absurdity, there's like a real emotional weight to it. You know, the spoken word passage, like you point out, is the most metalcore thing on the planet. And it's actually working. You know, the suggestion that like at the core of all the blasphemy and anti-Christianity is this seed of like absolute sorrow and grief, which permeates the entire record. The primary emotion on this album is not jealousy, it's not resentment, it's not misogyny, it's not rage, it's actually like grief and loneliness is the core emotional experience of God Was Created. There's never been anything else like this record or like this song. It exists in a realm of its own, but it represents the things that we love most in extreme metal. This blunt, tasteless execution in direct conversation with something far more sophisticated and emotionally resonant. It's one of my favorite songs of all time. And while I'm listening to it's always number one. All right, welcome back to the second part of our investigation of Vehemence, the greatest death metal band that ever came out of Arizona, although it's probably a tie with Nuclear Death. But I think those are the only two, so I guess everyone's in good company there. So before we get into our second review of Helping the World to See, their 2004 record, there were just a couple things that I wanted to bring up as potential influences that we didn't get a chance to talk about when we were talking about God Was Created. First and foremost, to try to identify more about the lineage of Vehemence's music, I think we have to point at a couple odd places that are particularly important given the time period of the early to mid-2000s. First and foremost among them would be Nevermore, which is a band that we very rarely talk about on the show, but we're actually both pretty good fans of, you know? Which surprised me. I had no idea that you were into them.
You introduced me to Nevermore on the show, and I think what you played for me was something like a power ballad or so by them.
Well, probably Believe in Nothing.
It was relevant to what we were reviewing at the time, but I can't say I didn't like that at all. Mm-hmm. But I got back to it through Sanctuary, especially the second or third Sanctuary album. So World Dane's first band. Sanctuary is very cool, sort of power metal that is basically closer to black or death metal riff-wise. Mm-hmm. It's and then my buddy played me some Nevermore, and I realized, oh, this sounds way more like Sanctuary than I realized. It's quite heavy. Mm-hmm. It's very extreme in the guitar.
Yes, Nevermore occupied a really interesting space of being effectively a power metal band that was cool for extreme metal people to listen to. And I think that especially some of their, like, deliberately overwrought guitar theatrics, especially in the lead department, could have been a major influence on Vehemence. Another one that's also extremely important for the time period that may have been an influence would be the early material by Strapping Young Lad and other early Devin Townsend stuff. Nowadays, Devin has slipped sort of entirely into the, like, prog guitar nerd space, but in the 2000s, it was extremely standard for extreme metal guys to listen to Strapping Young Lad. Which was, if you take an album like City from 1997, sort of an elaboration on the idea of earlier Fear Factory. But what I want to point to is Devin's propensity to use big natural chords in extreme metal contexts. I know that later in his career, he began tuning his guitar to, like, C major. He was playing in sort of, like, natural chord tunings. And this results in him delivering guitar textures that are basically extremely non-metal chord shapes applied to metallic riffing. And I think that Vehemence could have drawn some of their, like, more rock-influenced ideas from him. And then the final note that I want to give for a potential influence, or at least something in weird parallel development with Vehemence, although they have an older history than the American band, is Ill Disposed, who are a remarkably good Danish melodic death metal band who, like Vehemence, drew a lot from rock music as a primary source of inspiration, and delivered a lot of traditional Gothenburg-style riffs with a kind of muscular, heavy quality that you didn't typically hear from the Gothenburg bands themselves. So a record like There's Something Rotten in the State of Denmark would be a great companion piece to Vehemence. Now, granted, I think that the actual influences that caused Ill Disposed to develop in their own manner are very different from what Vehemence experienced. I'm sure that for Ill Disposed, stuff like Wolverine Blues was very central, where it's probably not for Vehemence. But I just thought that was a really interesting point of comparison that occurred to me after we signed off the other night.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I had to follow up on a thread from the first from our last review too. The I was talking about a possible comparison between Vehemence and Hypocrisy, because of the similarities in the album covers, the similarity of God was created to Osculum Obscenum, and the maybe that both of them were kind of, one of them was Swedish death metal influenced by American death metal, and the other is American death metal influenced by Swedish death metal. Mm-hmm. Well, I have looked into this connection, at least somewhat, and I think I was wrong. At least Osculum Obscenum and Penetralia, by Hypocrisy at least, do not... I mean, the only connection to Vehemence is that they're both death metal, right? There's there's some slightly melodic riffs on them that are, like, good and interesting, but you could get those from, like, 1,000 other bands. And, in fact, I would say those early Hypocrisy records are not very good.
No, I don't think they're very good either. But I think you should give yourself some credit. I think if you went a little bit later, like more toward the Arrival, when they picked up on the alien theme, you'd get a little closer. So
it could be that what Vehemence was really into then was that later alien-themed stuff, but they still, they referenced the cover of the classic early album.
And that was Hypocrisy's alien stuff in the early 2000s was quite popular. I never got especially into it, but I had a ton of friends that were really passionate about it.
Dude, see, this is the thing. I assumed that, like, okay, no serious metal to me, I didn't listen to them back in the day because I was like, oh, that's the fucking alien band, all right.
I don't think you would especially like it, but it would be interesting to check out.
It just wasn't on my radar. I think I sort of assumed that no serious metal person would be you wouldn't be listening to the Alien albums. but they were huge. I remember they were actually quite big when we were a lot younger.
Well, and the weird thing is, Hypocrisy is like completely faded from memory in America. Where they are still fucking enormous is South America. South Americans fucking love Hypocrisy. It's this weird inside joke among me and some of my music friends from, like, the same part of Florida that, like, every, like, Colombian and Venezuelan expat that we know fucking loves Hypocrisy. If you get them started, they'll never stop talking about it. It's a very strange cultural thing. Okay, so with all that out of the way, let's get to... the album of the hour, Helping the World to See from 2004, also released on Metal Blade Records. So, let's look at historical context. It's only 2 years after God was created, but tremendous changes have occurred in the metal scene over those 2 years. Metalcore has really been much more firmly established within the metal scene at this point. Obviously... when I say metalcore, we're referring to the metal-sided version of that. There were obviously all the kind of like Slayer shirt hardcore bands, Converge, stuff like that predates it, but I am talking about the stuff that is more melodic and more directly related to melodic death metal.
The stuff that the most mainstream of which got referred to as quote-unquote new wave of American heavy metal, which has to be one of the dumbest labels. Again, mass grave for journalists. Yeah,
that was kind of a weird period because that was also including stuff that wasn't really metalcore. Stuff like Lamb of God and God Forbid would have been tucked into that.
It ran all that stuff together. Trivium. I mean, Trivium was kind of a metalcore band, but also not, right?
Trivium was kind of a metalcore band and kind of a power metal band. I've actually gone back to that first Trivium record recently.
Kind of a rock band.
I went back to that first Trivium record recently. I'm like, this is like stupid, but it's kind of fun. It's like Bullet for My Valentine or something. So within that context, in a sense, the metal world has like caught up to big chunks of what the band was executing in 2002. So Vehemence, a band that has already kind of established themselves as seeking a large audience, has kind of a strange task in front of them for their third record. How do they continue to expand their kind of like audience buy-in while sticking with the stuff that they're passionate about and has been tried and true for their sound. Well, you get Helping the World to See, which is a record that even more directly than God Was Created kind of confronts metalcore on its own territory. There are some like direct kind of metalcore references or rejoinders across this record. And in an attempt to sort of, again, increase the audience buy-in, there's a lot more variation, I would say, on Helping the World to See in terms of kinds of songs and riffing styles and overall pacing. God Was Created is basically, we have created the best melodic death metal song possible. Now we are going to play it 10 times over the course of an hour. Helping the World to See is a little bit more ambitious in what it attempts to do. I'm not as fond of it because I love the sort of like deeply homogenous, contiguous nature of God Was Created. But I would say there's certainly moments on this record that are just as good as anything on God Was Created. And I think that a lot of my misgivings have to do with kind of abstract problems, like I don't love the track order, and I just think the pacing feels kind of weird a lot of the time. But Black Metal Guy, what did you think about this one in comparison to God Was Created?
Well, I think it's kind of actually the reverse. It's basically like the Dawn situation. You know, like I actually prefer this record. I think for a couple reasons. I think there's kind of an issue of tempo and production. It's that like the sort of the melodies on the first record are formed in a way, are structured in a way that's more characteristic of Brutal Death or the New York Asian bands or whatever, right? They have this so there's a way that because it's deliberately dense and pummeling, a lot of the core riffing doesn't necessarily have time to breathe in a way that would be normal for those melodies. And I do think it can also restrict their ear a little bit. Like I'm not blown away by the core melodic riffing there. It's really the big moments that you talked about in the last review. The sort of the way these songs build towards a set of very involved riffs that have dense arrangements over them, keyboards, acoustic. Those moments are highly memorable and often have very fully fleshed out melodies at intelligible tempos. But the sort of the basic percussive tuplet run stuff, I think left me a little cold when I first listened to it. I going back to it, I got a lot more mileage out of it. But basically, Helping the World to See, this second record works at much more normal tempos for those kinds of melodies. In some ways, that might make it less unique, right? It feels more like the Gothenburg bands, more like other Swedish stuff from that time. Like I can hear more direct similarities to something like Dawn or Canarus Quintet or whatever. And also, I think a lot more like metalcore.
Yes.
I think by 2004, Vehemence has an idea. Vehemence were very early to the party. This is 4 years later, right? It's actually kind of a long wait.
Well, 2 years. Because
2 years. I thought it was I thought it was 2000.
Their original album, The Thoughts from Which I Hide, their debut was 2000, and then God Was Created is 02.
Oh, sorry, I messed that up. Okay, so but even within that 2 year space, you're starting to get the rise of your American melodic metalcore, and it's this really feels like they are like Vehemence is picking up on that and composing songs that work more in that format, where say you'll move from a driving thrash beat section to an expansive halftime breakdown, over which you can suddenly develop a very long European style soaring melody. It's less so to me, I would say there's actually a lot of the riffing here I just like better. But it's
okay.
yeah, but
Just so you know, this is like not a crazy opinion to have. Like, more people like God Was Created, but like Helping the World to See has a contingent of devotees who insist that it's the real masterpiece.
well, so I think it's like the Dawn thing. Basically, like, you prefer, like, each of us, these are favorite bands for both of us, right? So we're each going to prefer the record where the band is more uncompromisingly themselves in ways that make it difficult, maybe a little more difficult to digest for people who aren't as immediately attracted to the aesthetic. And so, like, you weren't crazy to prefer Nair Solon, right?
Yeah.
Like, Nair Solon is in a lot of ways a more, although some of the riffing might be a bit more severe, it is in many, or a bit more angular. It is, in most ways, a much more accessible, exciting, riffy death metal record compared to Slaughter Sun.
Yeah.
And similarly, but I obviously preferred Slaughter Sun. Similarly, it's pretty clear God Was Created is more unique than Helping the World to See. And it does have a pure death metal quality to it that sort of overrides the melodies in a way that, like, maybe is good. Like, arguably that's good. I don't even really mean to say, like, it's okay for everything to not be super, not be, in some sense, I like, given that by the, we talk about all the time about how, most bands should be more brutal, right? or more aggressive, or not as wedded to the idea of big catchy melodies. So I think it's very cool that God Was Created plays as a death metal album first and foremost. I just think in terms of, if we're sort of isolating the melodies and whatever, that these make a little more sense to me, and seem a little more engaging. And I think also just because, although I do like brutal death metal and I appreciate Suffocation and all of that,
It's just never going to be your home territory.
Yeah, what I actually listen to is Swedish extreme metal and metalcore. So,
Okay.
So in some way, this record is a little less unique and a little more accessible, but it is more to my taste.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's totally fair. The accessibility.
You know what? It's also punky in a way, which we'll get to in my samples, which relates to it's a part of the metalcoreism that you might not expect, but in places this actually feels like hardcore.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. There is it's hard to tell whether Vehemence themselves were ever really listening to hardcore or metalcore, or if it was like very deliberate R&D on their part, where it's like, all right, guys, we're going to get together and listen to this Killswitch record just to see what's going on with the kids,
Right, for sure.
It's like opposition research or something, so...
Well, you also, to a certain degree, back then we had this thing called the radio, and you kind of had to listen to what was on it. And so even on a... you would certainly hear the Killswitch Holy Diver cover on a lot of rock radio stations, and, you would hear a lot of, you might hear Rose of Sharon or something, and you would certainly hear a lot of metalcore-laced emo stuff, emo songs with little Iron Maiden licks and shit, so it kind of was impossible to escape.
Yeah. And for the Zoomers out there, you it's difficult to articulate just how hated metalcore was by extreme metal fans in this era. We were probably the first generation of metalheads to, like, give a pass to metalcore or nu metal or any of these, like, false metal genres.
and that's specifically because I listened to various kinds of punk-related genres before I listened to pure metal. And in the death, so I sort of had actually cut my teeth on that somewhat before I got to Emperor, whereas the death metal guy was just has always been profoundly contrarian and pissed off all of the. He was a dyed-in-the-wool long-hair metalhead who would insist to all of his friends that metalcore was good.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it's like, well, the metalcore thing, I really developed more of a passion for it later in life, but I was never really offended by it, and that's also because, like, you kind of cut your teeth on punk, I cut my teeth on nu metal. So I was, I was in high school still insisting that, early Korn albums were valid and stuff like that. So with all that in mind, let's listen to
Heckin' valid.
they're heckin' valid. Korn feels seen right now. So with that in mind, let's listen to Vehemence in 2004 reacting relatively directly to some of the advancements in quote-unquote mainstream metal technology, to use that as a term of art. And let's listen to one of the big bangers on this record, the third track, Trinity Broadcasting, Know Your Enemy. We're just going to start from the very beginning, and honestly, this song is basically just banger riff after banger riff.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I really, really appreciate and really respect about Vehemence is that obviously they were deliberately courting the metalcore crowd on this record. However, they did not do that by just inserting unvarnished metalcore parts into their music. They listened to the techniques and found a way to naturally create Vehemence versions of those techniques. So the kind of stop-start breakdown riffing is clearly very connected to metalcore trends at the time, but doesn't really sound exactly like any of those bands. And
no, that's not where it's coming from.
Where do you think it's coming from?
Really stupid European death metal. The kind
that's
that I like.
fair. Yeah,
I'll get it. I have some samples addressing that.
Okay,
yeah.
cool. Well, and also something to appreciate is that in their pursuit of a bigger audience, they did not allow the brutal death influence to entirely disappear. It would be really easy for them to just like dump that off the boat in pursuit of a bigger audience, but they didn't because they're committed to that. So the last, 30 seconds of this sample features a lot of kind of brutal death technique, those little suffocation flourishes at the end, and a really kind of nasty grinding death metal trem riff at the very end of that sample.
Yep.
And obviously, it goes without saying that the primary riffs with the the twinned harmonized guitars are absolutely outstanding, and again are things that metalcore bands would end up doing a few years later, but they hadn't figured out how to tremolo pick fully yet. So Vehemence would say
those melodies are gorgeous. That's why I prefer this record. I'm just like they make space for the melody in a way that might draw something on the sort of rolling double bass continuum of a metalcore breakdown. But, like, melodically, that feels very, Dark Tranquility, Thy Primordial, Canarus, any of, like, the really gorgeous, flamboyant Swedish stuff. And Amon Amarth, as you pointed out, it's a little more technical than Amon Amarth, but that main melody is so well shaped. When he runs up, there's basically a lot of places he could have each phrase double the shape of the phrase before it, but there's always a resistance of inertia. There's always reverses, and in each iteration as he runs up the scale, he'll turn it around in a different way. He'll finish the phrase up, and then he'll finish it down, and then up, and hitting different notes every time. And then, the turnaround is not just we talked about this with Dawn, too, in the highest caliber Swedish riffing, right? There's it's not just four slightly different versions of the same phrase. There's a melody that runs throughout so that the turnaround is significantly different from all of the phrases preceding it. So you get there's a real continuous melody there, not just a few riffs fused together.
yes.
Or not just four versions of the same riff, making a longer riff. Yeah.
Yes. Another advantage that Vehemence had over the metalcore contemporaries was that they simply had more experience writing songs with heavily meaningfully integrated riff sets and repeating motifs. Smart metalcore bands really started to pick up on it, that there was more to life than diminished riff breakdown, but they would have to listen to something like Vehemence for that. Also, small note, another instance at the beginning of this song of Vehemence operating in 3/4 time. That primary riff is another 3/4 riff, which, as I listen to these records more and more, if you're paying attention, you'll see that these albums are massively composed of that waltzing time signature, which is this, I've never seen anyone talk about it, but it's integral to the band's sound. This sort of tragic, stepwise waltzing rhythm that adds this sort of beautifully sort of swaying and mournful quality to the music. I've always thought that was really fascinating. So moving on from there, to be sort of negative, but in an odd way, I really dislike the arrangement of tracks on this album. I think that I haven't puzzled it out myself, but I believe there's a way to make a record that is, at least in my opinion, neck and neck with God Was Created if we change the ordering of the tracks a little bit. So I say that because I'm coming to what is the second to last track on the record, which is really sort of technically the last song because, the final one is a re-recording of a demo track. So the last new material is We Are All Dying, which is one of the shortest tracks on the album. It is an incredible melodeath metalcore banger with a riff that I believe is in competition as the greatest melodeath riff of all time, but it's tucked all the way at the end of the record, and I do not understand why. Because this would be an outstanding, second track, but by the time you get to it, you're already exhausted from the preceding, 45 minutes of music. Did you feel anything weird about the sort of pacing of the record? Or is this just like a neurosis on my part?
I think I enjoyed it too immediately to feel much other than I like the track. I really liked listening to this record. I was I was windmilling in the living room.
Oh, that's sick.
Yeah. And so I think the way it's sequenced seems to run from more elaborate and colorful songs with more involved true metal riffing to songs that are formatted in a more stripped down way that has more to do with hardcore or metalcore or whatever. And I thought that the gradual inclusion of those tracks was so novel that I had been so not expecting that it really gave more legs to the record.
Okay.
Right? You know what I mean? Imagine this were a new band, right? Imagine this were imagine we were reviewing this in one of the 2002 Terminus reviews, right? And we heard it and it's okay, there's this very well executed melodic stuff, and then suddenly you're oh, but this band isn't all about highbrow, and there's actually a very different side of the spectrum, and there's songs that work at different tempos and rhythms, and then suddenly, I feel that introduces a new dimension to it that actually sustains attention. However, thinking about it now, I see what you mean, for sure. Some of the punchier stuff could go further up front, and it can be kind of anticlimactic to finish a record on material that actually gets... On a record that's characterized by its very agile sense of melody, it's a little bit weird to end a record on the stuff that is the less sophisticated arrangements and whatever, right?
Yeah. I think that
unless you're deliberately building to a climax track, then you have 2 minutes of grinding, blasting, and then it's over. Okay, that's something different.
Yeah,
but it's the track listing is a little bit random. I see what you mean.
Yeah, it's a little odd. So, I mean, for instance, one of the huge sticking points has always been Kill for God as the second track, which is an excellent song, but a much, slower and more kind of introspective and hazy kind of track, which just seems like a very strange interrupter of momentum at the beginning of the record. But I'm definitely nitpicking at this point because I've listened to this album 200 times, so clearly it can't be that bad. So let's listen to We Are All Dying, and honestly, man, just everybody at home, just listen closely to the opening riff, which may be one of the single most information and technique dense single riffs I've ever heard in my life. You know, I am the furthest thing in the world from a, like, technical guitarist. I generally have very little interest in playing technical stuff, but I have always, since being a teenager, wanted to learn that main riff, because I just feel like being able to bust that out on guitar has to be the most satisfying feeling in the world.
Yeah, that's a crazy riff. So, on God Was Created, I was talking about that one riff that's like the most complex Gothenburg pedal point riff, or stepwise riff. And this is the same, basically the same format, but it's even more complicated. And instead of having just a very involved motion around the upper part of the fretboard, this one has just like, it's a riff. It definitely doesn't work as a continuous melody. It's like a riff, and it's in part because it's made up of 4 discrete phrases in different picking style, in like totally different styles of like fingering and picking. It's
yes, I mean it's
like remembering what you're supposed to do next. Oh my fucking god.
Yeah, well, it's clear that it was. That's a kind of riff you can tell was like written by the guitarist to deliberately make something extremely difficult and see if they could pull off every trick inside of a single riff. You know, the constantly switching rhythmic patterns, the elaborate kind of runs. It's so fucking cool. And of course, there's the rest of the song that is also fucking killer. You've got, you know, these multiple kind of breakdown phrases with the channel switching lead accents. You've got the big metalcore open chords that are used to great effect here to create some like emotional impetus to the music. It's so fucking awesome. And the lyrics have a Slayer reference to War Ensemble, which I think is pretty cool too. So this is definitely just a straight up I like the riff kind of song, but when the riffs are that good, I don't think you really need anything else.
Yeah, well, when you hear it I understand your complaints about the pacing, but also when you hear a banger this good at the end of the record, it's kind of like, well, I'm glad I kept listening.
Yeah, definitely. So, there is that.
You know, you could have put this up front and put Trinity Broadcasting at the end.
Yeah, Trinity's right? Has kind of a bigger scope, you know?
Yes, for sure. Speaking of a narrow scope, here is track 4 is when these sort of more is when this record starts to show its more stripped down or punkish side, and that is To the Waist.
To the Taste.
That was in my notes. I typoed it.
Yeah, I fixed it.
Yeah. Oh, it's not To the Waist?
No, it's
is To the Taste?
To the Taste, yeah.
Oh, well, in the files I have, it says To the Waist.
Oh, I think that's that's an error with our pirated MP3 copy. Yeah, it's To the Taste.
All right, so, okay, so it's not about barbarians, it's about cannibals. So this we'll listen to this. And
actually, I think it's about. I think it might be about. I think it's about smoking weed. Actually, that's the funny thing.
No way.
It's their weed song.
All right, time to take a fat bong rip.
Oh, it's 420 somewhere, brother.
It's
That is a great example of a, I'll just say the main thing. Basically, that obviously has something to do with hardcore, but it does not sound like American metalcore. It does sound a bit like European metalcore, but that's getting beside ourselves. It's beside the point. What it really sounds like is Unleashed.
Oh, it does.
Really stupid Swedish death metal. Unleashed, Grave, maybe the later, more bolt-throwery Dismember records that you showed me.
Yeah, it's like, obviously their right-hand work is more sophisticated on guitar, but I totally get what you mean.
Honestly, Unleashed has complex picking. They do, one reason they're good is that, the Shugga Shugga, at least, maybe not on their first or second record, but they're able to get a lot of variation in the Shugga Shugga. But yes, there is really good right-hand work here. And that's one thing that sets it apart. You could have a there's much more. You could have generic versions of the picking of the root note picking in the main riff, but the picking here is much more driven and frantic and has a lot of variation in it. That makes it really rip. So that that is real thrash or death metal picking. And yet it's not thrown in there in the kind of like. It's not a throwaway song for contrast in the classic tradition of interrupting Darkthrone riff.
Yeah.
It's a you can hear even in the end of that main verse riff, the intervals they choose are like da 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 da. There's like a minor sixth there, right? There's like a fifth and a minor sixth. It feels epic. It still has the sort of it still has a bit of that, the sinister nobility that you would get from the Gothenburg style or the other Swedish bands. It has melodic color. It's not just like playing, a tritone and a half step and shit.
Yeah. I love the sheer amount of effort and density in the Weed song.
Yeah, for real. And then it sort of the way it develops is also very related to Unleashed. You have the ripping thrash riff, and then you go da 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 da. It's a breakdown. It's not exactly a hardcore breakdown. It's a hardcore influenced death metal breakdown. It also sounds like Jungle Rot.
Oh, yeah, it does.
Jungle Rot with more color. Eventually, once they bring us into a true full-on breakdown, again, those are sort of like, inverted power chords or whatever, being played in a kind of hitting consonant epic intervals. It sounds more like a dumbed-down version of Behemoth or something. So it does a hardcore thing, maybe even more so than a lot of the, American metalcore bands weren't really known for like ripping thrash attack. So in some ways this feels more like true hardcore than the melodic metalcore that was popular at the time.
Yeah.
But it's really all coming out of death. You don't have to look further afield than just fun mosh death metal for where this is coming from.
Yeah, it's again, it's Vehemence's commitment to their kind of musical principles is really admirable. In an era where, where bands were kind of compromising left and right for audience capture, Vehemence really went about it the best way possible.
Yeah. All right, I wanted to do just to get some of the more melodic riffing in there. Let's do You Don't Have to Be Afraid Anymore.
It's a great one.
And we're coming in. They've done an initial repetition of riff 1, riff 2. We're going to the second riff 1, riff 2 sequence. All right. So,
This one really pulls off the airy melodic versus like heavy and earthy contrast extremely well.
yes, I really like that about it. It probably speaks somewhat to the side of me that really likes the way that Dawn will launch from a trem riff into just like a breakdown, whatever, especially on Ner Solon. But here, it's not just high contrast between two clearly defined sections. These things are being traded off each other intricately on the second to second level, within the same riff. So, obviously the first and second riff there are great in that sequence. First has a very cool kind of Baroque feeling in these ascending chug pattern that then curls around at a smoother trem. And then you get that da-da, 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 that knuckle dragging riff, which is awesome. Real highlight for me. Not just knuckle drag, I mean, it's primal. And then they go into this insane choppy sequence that the death metal guy and I were just like kind of floored by to hear it again. It's very difficult to describe what happens there, but basically a lot of the rhythmic ideas from that sort of the rhythmic idea of slide up step chug from the second riff becomes like the rule for permutation there in all sorts of weird ways. You can do like some legato chord chug with all this like crazy weird lead shit spiraling out of it. Then you get a solo, and then the solo sets us up for some more consistent melodic material, and you get these ascending runs of tandem guitar. And he's saying the chorus, right? He's saying you don't have to be afraid anymore. Don't be afraid, whatever. And that's actually a new version or a development of the melody from the first riff, which sets it up beautifully to throw back into that second riff in a way that feels surprising, but is, when you come back into that sort of thunderous, crashing, doomish riff, it's actually been set up by a modification of the initial melody of the first riff. So, this is really sophisticated structural stuff that is a lot like some of the techniques we were talking about in the Dawn record.
Yeah,
right? With the way that like riff 1 doesn't have to go. Riff 1 went into riff 2 once, but it doesn't have to do that again. And if it is going to do that again, riff 1 is going to be a different riff. It's very free use of structure, really sophisticated. But I also want to talk about influence there. Mm-hmm. When we started out this review, it was with the dewy-eyed optimism that perhaps through Vehemence, death metal fans could escape the long shadowed whip hand of Argoslan, but they cannot. This song is everything after the initial riff 1. If everything after riff 1 could be Argoslan with traditional death metal production, it is that da-dum 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 da-dum. I mean, that's just unincorrigible bigotry. The even the involved choppy percussive stuff in the middle is that's Slent stuff. The soloing and the tandem guitar, yeah, it all sounds like Vehemence. Like, it sounds more sweet, more vehemency, more like God Was Created, more like the Swedish bands, whatever. It has its own flavor. It's not like this is like a tribute project by any means. But like all of those things you could basically hear, Galal and Holocausto and whatever doing. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Of course, I can't. It's possible this is convergent evolution, right? I can't, I can't pin the charge on them. But whereas I think God Was Created is very distinct from the Slent sound, and any resemblance is coincidental. Helping the World to See really has some... It resembles that in ways that are uncanny. And by this point,
Incorrigible's been out for a couple years.
Incorrigible's been out for a couple of years, which also means that, like, there is incentive to go back and listen to Battle Ruins, which, although it's different, it has a lot of tracks that could be on Incorrigible. And, you know, there's the EP, and, you know, there's all their sort of, they also have a lot of, like, EP and demo material and comp stuff out at that point. So I find it hard to believe that somebody wasn't listening to some Slent. And, you know, processing it in a way that's really interesting, because they're clearly just interested in it as a really good melodic death metal band, and folding it into what they're already doing. So it means there's a kind of riffing on this record that has a muscular heavy metal feel or thrash metal feel that's quite distinct from what they were pulling from either the Swedes or the NYDM bands. And maybe feels a little bit more martial. The track before, the other track, Spirit of the Soldier, I love. And that one is a little simpler, and it again has these kinds of, it sounds very... There's very solemn lyrics that are kind of an ambiguous perspective, sort of war critical, but soldier respectful. And, you know, between that kind of solemn martial lyric and the actual sort of crashing anthemic chug doom riffs in it, it really does sound like Argoslent in a way that's kind of fitting. So, you know, that kind of, you can hear that. Vehemence definitely seems interested in the decline of the American Empire in one way or another.
Yeah.
And so, there's a natural resonance there in some way.